How do we get Malcolm X wrong? Well, we get him wrong by thinking of him as just a one-dimensional black prophet of rage, of anger, of criticism against white racism, against the dehumanization of black bodies. Malcolm was all of this, but he was also much more.
Do you consider yourself militant?
I consider myself Malcolm.
Hi, my name is Dr. Peniel Joseph, and I am the Barbara Jordan Chair in Political Values and Ethics at the University of Texas at Austin, and author of The Sword and the Shield, The Revolutionary Lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. The myth of Malcolm X is created both through the media of the 1950s and 60s, but also retrospectively through the autobiography of Malcolm X. Islamophobia definitely shapes the narrative of Malcolm X. Malcolm is not a Christian. He's the only non-Christian major black political leader of the era. But the media, instead of just calling him a Muslim and the black people who were part of the Nation of Islam Muslims, they call them black Muslims as a slur. That really does shape this idea that he is un-American, that he is subversive, that he is beyond the pale of acceptable forms of both political leadership, but also faith leadership.
Nonviolent is a word that's misused today. I would call it a peaceful movement, which reserves the right to defend itself whenever it is attacked.
The myth of Malcolm really flattens Malcolm X out, and it really differs from the full-throated individual, the complex individual who Malcolm X was. Malcolm X is a father, he's a husband, he's a brother, he's a son. He's got personal vulnerabilities as well as these awesome political responsibilities and these talents. Malcolm is one of the funniest people ever. He's got a huge sense of humor. He makes fun of racism and racists, but also makes fun of black people in a loving way extemporaneously. So one of the things that the myth doesn't talk about is just how much humor and joy and vulnerability Malcolm X actually has.
What did you say, Malcolm?
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing.
Chickens coming home to roost is something that Malcolm tells reporters in the aftermath of President John F. Kennedy's assassination. What Malcolm was trying to say was that Kennedy's assassination was based on a kind of karma in terms of white supremacist racial violence against people of color in the United States and globally. When we think about not just 63, Vietnam is still happening, but all over the world, when we think about U.S. support for regimes that are colonial regimes in Africa and the larger third world. That off-the-cuff statement becomes interpreted by the white mainstream press as Malcolm X being happy that the President of the United States has been assassinated.
Well, that's what the press says. What will I look like saying that I'm glad the president was killed?
Sometimes Malcolm's brilliant sort of extemporaneous mind would get him in trouble, especially with the mainstream press, who was always looking to jab Malcolm X.
Would you agree that you're on the lunatic fringe of the American Negro movement?
Well, I think that America's whole situation is a lunatic fringe. Anytime you have a country that refers to itself as the free world and a democracy, and at the same time has 22 million of its citizens who aren't permitted citizenship, why, that in itself reflects lunacy.
Malcolm X loved uncovering American lies, and by this we mean that he loved combating racial stereotypes about black people. That black people were poor, black people were being incarcerated, black people were lazy, they were unintelligent, and it was their own fault. What Malcolm says, he really accuses white America of a series of crimes against black humanity. So in this case, Malcolm becomes black America's prosecuting attorney, where he talks about racial slavery. He talks about white supremacy. He talked about black women being assaulted by white men. He talked about the way in which black women were vulnerable from slavery to the present as well. So when we think about Malcolm X, the lies he was uncovering were these lies that really rationalized structural racism, white supremacy, violence against black people as their own fault.
Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind?
Malcolm told audiences of black people that they had a problem because they didn't love themselves, they loved white people. We were all Negroes before Malcolm X. Malcolm X taught black men and women, children, boys and girls to love being black. Not just African American, but black, because black is global and connected to the diaspora. Malcolm becomes an advocate of radical black dignity. And by radical black dignity, Malcolm is calling for not just an end of racial oppression and white supremacy. Malcolm's calling for the recognition of black humanity everywhere. But what makes it so radical is that Malcolm doesn't care what white people think. And sometimes people say Malcolm has an epiphany in the Hajj where he says that white people are no longer devils. That's not true. What happens in the last stage is that all the things that he had previously believed continue to evolve. And like he told the media in '64, his views hadn't changed, but his experience had broadened.
No matter how much respect, no matter how much recognition whites show toward me, as far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me.
Malcolm X's legacy is this idea that blackness is a positive, complex, richly glorious tradition to be a part of, that it was a responsibility and not a burden. Malcolm is the activist who allowed us to love ourselves. And that means black women, that means black men, that means black children, that means black babies. Because Malcolm said that self-love had to come from within, but he also said we had to be willing to die for ourselves. And we had to recognize our own humanity and love, but we had to also acknowledge the pain and the trauma of racial slavery. Malcolm X experienced racial trauma with his mom being institutionalized, his father being murdered, himself being incarcerated, and he comes out really for the rest of his life not only as a political sword, but somebody who wants to be a shield to help heal the black community. So that's his legacy.